I invite us to stand as we hear the gospel for today, which is from St. Luke, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it to water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things being done by him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Christ.
If you were to find yourself in the trenches during the First World War as a combatant, so try to imagine a lot of mud, a lot of artillery fire flying overhead, and probably, I'm imagining, being sore and achy all of the time from digging and whatever else would be required. I have trouble even imagining how hard it must have been to be in those trenches. But imagine if you were. Would you have thought to yourself that what you should do with your time is write Tractatus Philosophicus, the analytic philosophical tome that transformed all of British philosophy in the 20th century? Is that what you would do with your time? Little notebooks, and then eventually go back to your university and present this, and they're all like, what is this even? A set of theses that's about language, like what words do. That was Ludwig Wittgenstein who did that. He really did transform British philosophy. There's a big debate about whether that has any influence on other aspects of like continental philosophy or American philosophy, because it was really bizarre and weird and kind of adjacent to a lot of other philosophy. But nevertheless, that's what he did with the time that was given him in that trench. Another example that I think about quite often, much more popular than Ludwig Wittgenstein, is one that most people now know, because you've seen the movies, The Lord of the Rings, which were also started and written by somebody engaged in the wars of that period. And then he committed the rest of his life to fleshing out a story that wasn't just a story, but was like an entire world in 3 languages. And we all now know it as Middle Earth, right? Like a whole creation, a whole sub-creation that he made born out of that space. Another example And this one is the one that has to get reconfigured, and I think needs to be reconfigured more in our popular imaginations than it currently is. You know, if I say the name Rosa Parks, everybody will immediately know who I'm talking about, right? So what you'll imagine is a sole, individual woman sitting down in a bus against the policies of the bus and then getting in trouble and causing a big stir because she sat down in the bus and wouldn't get up out of her seat. But what we don't tell frequently enough was the fact that that was then part of a large citywide bus strike that the whole black community engaged in for months. And if you don't own a car and you have to go to work and you always rode the bus, what do? You walk, or you find carpools. And the Rosa Parks story, which is very, very important because she was heroic in this way, is really a synecdoche for the whole of this larger thing that was going on. And can you imagine deciding that your social, racial, and civic duty is to walk 10 miles to work every day when there are buses running? And how long can you sustain that? You know, how long can you do that? I think that something that happens to us, and it's very, very natural, is we get into these modes of thinking that whatever we're currently in the habit of the middle of doing is simply what we'll just keep doing. Inertia is a real thing. If a car is moving down the road, it's going to keep moving unless there's some things that slow it down, or it bumps into something, or it's forced to turn, or all that kind of thing, right? Inertia is a real thing in our lives. And so you have in this gospel for today an example of the massive interruption of inertia. The inertia here is, you know, you're supposed to go to church on the Sabbath, and you're supposed to listen to somebody teach on the Sabbath. All of you have engaged in this form of inertia today, at least. For some of you, this is just your inertia. Some of you are so in this pattern that you probably have a little bit of a scratch carved in the back of the pew where you sit every single time. I'm not even joking about that. When I was in Wisconsin, I used to be a pastor in Wisconsin until I moved here 14 years ago. And we went back this summer. It was really interesting because it was all the same people as 14 years ago. In rural Wisconsin, not a lot changes. And one of my members, back when I used to live there, he actually wore suspenders. And when he died, we all kind of went and looked at his spot on the pew because he'd literally carved like little trenches in the back of the pew where he sat. Because he and his wife were more regular in church than I was. So you get in these modes. Others of you had to overcome inertia to get here today, right? And that was really hard. So we all know what this is like. And so the inertia in this moment is this woman has gotten used to being crippled. Everybody around her has gotten used to her being crippled. Everybody has adopted the pattern that they think Torah teaches, which is you're not supposed to do work on the Sabbath. What you're supposed to do is go to church and listen to a sermon. And Jesus does this thing. He uses his words. Ludwig Wittgenstein probably did have a heyday with things like this. Jesus using his words to do things. He says, "You're healed of your ailments," and she's immediately healed, and she starts to praise God. And it's hard to know honestly, I'm not sure that I know whether the leader of the synagogue was more upset that Jesus did work on the Sabbath, or maybe he was really upset because he had this regular parishioner who'd been there for 18 years, and he knew how to handle her as a crippled woman coming every time, and now that's changed. But regardless, he gets upset. And then Jesus does the thing that everybody always stereotypically talks about Jesus, right? He says, "Oh man, you're okay. I love you. You're great. I hear you. You're an amazing guy. Let's all get along." Does he say that? Well, one of the things that I love about this is we have this stereotype in our culture. One of our forms of inertia is that we think that Jesus is pretty much calm and peace-loving and just likes everybody. Whereas in actuality, when you read the Gospels, he's quite regularly, especially when he's aiming up. So there's a rule. Keep this in mind. So this, maybe ignore the rest of the sermon, just remember this. Jesus frequently punched up, he never punched down. He did punch. That's what people get wrong. But he punched up. What does he say? "You hypocrites," to the leader for trying to maintain the inertia when he's changing the inertia. So he changes two things. One, the woman's now healed, so that's going to disrupt things in the synagogue. Everything's going to be different now because everybody's going to have to act differently around, geez, she's like a normal woman now, or whatever you want to call that, of not being crippled. So he heals her, and he heals on the Sabbath, which puts pressure on the leader of the synagogue, because if Jesus can heal on the Sabbath, is he going to have to start healing on the Sabbath too now? Uh-oh. There's all kinds of changes he can start to think of in his own life. Plus, this guy broke the rules. And then Jesus teaches this thing. "Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it to water? Not this woman. Be set free from the bondage on the Sabbath day." There's all kinds of discussion around this. Different communities come up with different things around what they can and can't do on times of rest. What Jesus is simply pointing out is if you can do really practical things like make sure that your donkey doesn't go without water for the day, maybe it's also okay for a woman who's been sick for 18 years not to have to be crippled anymore. So we're now, what I had said in lead up to today is I want to work on a series over the course of this fall on what it means to have faith in a time of significant reorientation. And what I would want to ask us, quite simply, is what are we currently tempted into inertia around right now? And are you at least intrigued by the possibility of moving like Ludwig Wittgenstein or J.R.R. Tolkien or Rosa Parks or Jesus, or like the previously crippled woman in this moment? And what would that mean? I think that we're probably in a moment like this both looking for models that we could emulate to move like that, and we're also really scared and tired kind of at the same time. So that's the question, right? Like, what do you do with the mixture of all of that? That probably it would be a good idea to find some ways to move in some more freeing ways within the world and within your life, and yet at the same time you're also having to survive all the pressures of what we're living with. And what I find intriguing about the list that I've just made for us is how different each one of them moved. Go back to Wittgenstein. His actions were entirely not on point for the situation at all. You know, like, you're fighting in World War I, your main assignment is like to win the war. Like, in what way is writing a philosophical tractatus about words going to do that at all? How did he even have the mental space to do that? And you might kind of think about within your own life whether perhaps you could be hopeful that some of the things you're currently investing your time in are actually as useful as that, even though they seem like a complete distraction from the war that's raging around you. Right? So that's like one thing that I think I find very inspiring about his story is we can't always know what God is up to in our life that looks entirely adjacent to or separate from the dominant stuff that everybody seems to be worrying about. And it takes a lot of trust to keep going at that thing when everything around you seems to be telling you, pick up a gun and run over the wall. And you're like, I'm going to keep working on this. Conversely, or not conversely, but like somehow different, if we're going to have a world that isn't like the parts of the world that we currently don't like very much, and there's a good number of things to not like about the way the world is going, it requires that some of us imagine an entirely different world. And I mean that both in the literal and in the figurative sense, because, like, for example, in a world where there's a pressure cooker of paying attention to the now and the urgent, how do you do things like write fiction? Create synthetic languages. Draw maps of worlds that don't exist. Which is all of which was what Tolkien did. And most importantly, think that that's part of the Catholic imagination. Like, he was a Roman Catholic, right? So he believed that everything that he was doing was an aspect of his faith, actually. Or you can go the Rosa Parks route, also out of her faith, directly on point, putting her butt on the biggest abrasive space within her cultural and political landscape, the rights of African Americans in a society that had segregated them, right? And how do you do that along with your community? Do you trust the community around you enough to make the really vulnerable move because they're going to have your back by walking every day? So you might consider that. The main thing that I think Jesus illustrates here, and this is really mostly all I want us to consider for the rest of the day, is that he is unwilling to keep moving in the patterns of inertia that he's seen around him when he knows that a lateral move, even if disruptive, is going to help this particular woman. So the real heart of this question about how to live and move in a time of reorientation is to follow that model, to keep your eyes on. I think it's just really interesting to me. A lot of times, and I've been guilty of this. It's not always easy. Like I'll just give you an example from being the pastor. Unlike everybody else in the room right now, I had to be prepared to talk for 15 or 20 minutes in the middle of the service about something that would be somewhat interesting to you for that block of time. And that is no small thing. Therefore, during the service and before the service, many people who are preparing to do that don't have a lot of other mental capacity to pay attention to things like even simple questions of like, how are you doing? Right? I've gotten better at it over time, but I can still remember back when I was first preaching how hard it was for me to have any kind of social engagement with anybody at all because my brain was entirely sucked up. Ted knows what's this like as a concert performer. I'm sure that Lime had the same issue as they were preparing to do the prelude for the first time of like, if I talk to you, I might forget my prelude, right? Like, I mean, there's this whole kind of thing. Okay, so Jesus is kind of a new preacher, and he's coming in here. You think he should be focused on the sermon and the liturgy and all that kind of stuff. And what might be the most shocking thing at all is he brings the crippled woman's healing into the center. And that might be the most important thing for us to consider what that means for us now as a community of faith. I think we try to do this. I think we can always do better at this. But what does it mean to shape community of faith and worship? Not around the rules or the inertia, but around who in the room has the greatest need. Yeah, go for it.
I loved it. I think it was wonderful. I just have a couple things that I would like to say about the disability aspect of it.
Yeah, do it.
I recently read a book called My Body Is Not a Prayer Request that talks
Ooh.
about the ways that churches talk about disability, and this Bible passage can be problematic. I mean, in the Bible passage, the problem that the author noted was that the woman doesn't ask Jesus to intervene on her body. I mean, she does celebrate after it happens, but Jesus just like changed her body without kind of talking to her about it first. And the person who wrote this book said that the problem she had in her church was that people would come and pray over her without her asking them to, and they would sing a hymn called No Wheelchairs in Heaven. And she wanted them to sing a hymn called No Stairs in Heaven, because she said the wheelchair is actually really beneficial, and she liked the passage from Ezekiel where it says God is sitting in a wheelchair, like God has a chair with wheels. Like Ezekiel saw God and God was sitting in a chair with wheels, and she's like, the wheelchair is the benefit, the stairs are the problem. And she said, John makes me add some wheelchair ramps, because the wheelchairs are helping me. And she talked about, she likes the Bible passage where they carved the hole in the ceiling to lower someone down, so it's like they were modifying the building to allow accessibility rather than just trying to change the person. She said when people would come up and pray over her. And I went to a church previously where we had some people with disabilities, and they would make us change, because I was in the choir, they would make us change the words of the hymns. So there was one hymn that said, the blind will be made to see. And he'd been blind his whole life, and it's just part of who he was. And he wanted us to change the words to say, blind people who ask to be able to see will be able to see. And then we had a BDSM component who said, and people who are in chains who don't want to be in chains will no longer be in chains. So we had to change the words to a lot of our hymns. But it was a lot about kind of, instead of just viewing people's bodies with disabilities as needing to be fixed without talking to them, instead it was kind of like people who are asking for help and receive help. So the way that the Bible passage happens where Jesus just bulldozes this woman and changes her body, I think that the person who wrote My Body Is Not a Prayer Request would like there to be a conversation first. So just making a note of that. I think the sermon was great in terms of like social change and stuff, but I think in terms of disability, that's always just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And I know there were times when Jesus had the conversation first.
Yeah.
Not every time.
I want to leave it right there because one aspect of preparing a sermon is it's always coming from one person. And so it'll be both what I could come up with and what I fail to come up with. And so your guys' additions are excellent continuation of the topic. So thank you very much. And for right now, I want to invite us to join in singing our hymn.